Our next speaker is Paul Wagner, another newcomer. I think we'll hear some very different views from him. Paul is an independent filmmaker from Charlottesville. He makes documentary films, primarily not on SETI, but on environmental subjects and things like that. He is the winner of an Oscar and an Emmy for his efforts. Paul.
Thank you. I took our mandate to talk about communication in a totally different way, and so I'm going to see if I can move us all in a significantly different direction. Not to talk about communication, human-alien communication, but to talk about a form of communication that I've heard come up, not so much in this room over the last couple of days, but in the margins of this workshop. Over lunch, over drinks and coffee. And that is the nature of communication between this community of scientists and the general public, and the presentation and the selling, if you will, the marketing, which has been talked about, of the ideas and work created by you and your colleagues and the general public, and the potential impact that that has or doesn't have on the general public. It's also become apparent to me that this is probably a pretty important issue, given particularly issues of funding and public support. As Frank mentioned, I am neither a scientist, and I'm not even a filmmaker who has done much in terms of content of my films in the area of science. The nearest thing, actually, I did a short film in 1992 about the first invasion of North America by aliens led by Christopher Columbus and leading a horde of Western Europeans. This was a documentary for the Smithsonian about the Columbian Quincentenary that I produced for them. But most of my films have been about issues of culture, broadly defined, history, politics, religion, and in general they are films that have been shown on public television. I mean, a mundane one. This spring, a documentary I made about the world of thoroughbred horse racing, sort of an inside look at thoroughbred horse racing, will be broadcast on PBS. We made a feature a few years ago that was released theatrically called Wind Horse, that is a narrative, dramatic feature, not a documentary, but sort of documentary based, that we filmed secretly in Tibet. And it's a sort of a political melodrama. So I have a habit, almost an addiction I would say, to working on subject matter that I actually know very little about. My rationalization for that, there are two rationalizations. One is that I pride myself in collaborating with the best. I make sure I know enough about a subject that I am working with people who are really at the top of that game. And the second is, and this really does sound like a rationale, and perhaps it is, but I can best represent the interests of the several million viewers who stand behind me by asking all the dumb questions, which for them are the right questions, because that's what they don't know. And very often, working with people like yourselves, perhaps not in science, but in American folklore, where I've done a lot of work, or history, it's very difficult, if I may say this, for those of you sitting here to get outside your own world and your own knowledge and understand the kind of very normal, naturally flowing questions that a general audience might have. So I want to try to see if we can do sort of a thought exercise instead of walking through, taking some concepts that you are dealing perhaps with in your work and thinking about how they might be reconfigured, even translated, I like to use that word, in ways that could have an impact on the general public. And of course, I'm a filmmaker, so I'm thinking about this in terms of film stories. Several years ago, we had a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to make a documentary about the history of Irish immigration to America. I'm barely Irish. I'm like, 1/4. I'm not a historian. Started out knowing nothing about the subject. We worked with help of NEH, went through a couple of years actually of research and talking to scholars about it, and came up with a long list of the pertinent content, themes and concepts. Role of British politics, Catholic religion, rise of industrial labor, the role of women in Ireland and America, agricultural traditions and practices in Ireland, folk belief, language, this whole panoply of important ideas that the historians talk about, think about, do research about, write about. In all that time, I really was sort of bombarded in the way I felt bombarded the last couple of days, by the way, hearing so much, getting so much input. It's mind-boggling and exciting, but also confusing. And in the case of this project, I went through a good year and a half of confusion about, well, I understand that's all important, but I'm always thinking, what are these people sitting at home in their living room? They don't want to hear someone talking for 2 hours about the role of agricultural practices in Ireland, how it affected immigration to America. And finally, over many hours of brainstorming with a number of historians in the field, I learned from a guy who's actually become a friend, Kirby Miller, historian at the University of Missouri. He had compiled a collection of letters written by immigrants, Irish immigrants, from America for the most part, back to Ireland. And you know, as soon as I heard it, I thought, oh, that's really interesting. And then I thought about it, and I thought, that is really interesting. Because with his help and guidance in interpreting these letters, we were able to take every one of those themes and concepts and find a letter or a series of letters or a memoir coupled with the experiences of a given immigrant that would play out every one of those themes. And so the final film is a 2-hour documentary, and we trace the lives of 8 immigrants, tracking a period of time from the just pre-famine into the early 20th century. And each immigrant plays out one or several of these themes. And it worked, I think I can fairly say it worked very well as a film, because of course we weren't just talking about ideas, we were telling stories. The concepts were embedded in stories. And in some ways I'm preaching to the choir here. There have been fabulous stories come out of this community. You know, certainly Contact, the documentary work in Cosmos, and many other things. So I know this isn't some new revelation, but I wanted to, I guess I want to encourage you as part of your work, if you really do care, as I'm hearing you care, about how the public reacts to what you're doing, and particularly how the government, in terms of funding, react to it, then it is in your best interest, and maybe even an obligation on your part, to make sure that those ideas are communicated and excite the public. It's not going to happen, you know, on its own. So just a couple of thoughts in the case of, to take the case of SETI and applying sort of this process that I would normally go through in creating a film. You know, what are the most important concepts? Maybe that's different for each of you because you have your own fields of specialization. But the things that you think are important for the public to understand. And then, you know, where are the immigrant letters? You know, where are the stories that you can tell? Now that's stories broadly defined. That could be many things. Maybe it's your own personal experience dealing with the content. Maybe it's something unusual that you found, you know, that a way to a particular breakthrough that you made, how it came in a serendipitous way. I mean, that could be a fabulous story. And I've heard a number of those actually in our conversations this week. And then, you know, as this process works forward, it becomes more and more the obligation of the filmmaker working with the subject matter expert yourselves. You know, what are the most effective means of storytelling? And this is really, just speaking as a filmmaker, this has gotten incredibly complicated. It used to be, oh yeah, I make public television documentaries and here's the script and we're going to shoot it. Now it's like, well, what is the web component? You know, is there an app? You know, what? You know, there are a lot of different. The media mix has become much more complicated. It's also become much more exciting, and I have to say, I'm sort of embarrassed to say I haven't figured that out. That's sort of where I am in my career, trying to figure out how to create a relationship and pull on the power of these different elements. Films and documentaries are fabulous because, you know, the content people and the filmmakers we are the gods and masters and we are driving what the person sees, feels, and understands about the subject matter. The other stuff, the apps, the web, it's obviously a much more interactive environment, and so that requires different skills and touches. What I'm excited about is the combination of those things. You know, maybe driving ideas and stories in more of a broadcast realm or downloadable streaming realm, and then allowing for some kinds of interaction. I was talking earlier to Jill. She was explaining the SETI conquest. Now this is, in a way, this is sort of what I'm talking about. She's seeing it as a component of research, but it could also be a component of storytelling. Now you've got all these people online who are already, they're perfect. They're set up as a perfect audience. And how can we use them as you start telling stories through other media? How can you use them at a grassroots level to sort of mobilize public excitement about these ideas and to repeat those stories? So that's the gist of what I want to say. I would just sort of challenge you to try to find ways to reconceptualize your subject matter in stories. There are people, you know, writers. This is not just about film, by the way. It's about writers, science fiction writers, documentary writers, storytellers of all kinds. I think everyone can be excited about this subject matter. The other thought I've had about this is, and maybe this is the problem, but it could also be the opportunity. I'll call it the Billy Carter problem. You have a body of work, of serious work on the subject of SETI, and then you have a Wild West frontier of people excited about UFOs and flying saucers. And it seems to me they're the Billy Carters in your life, the people who you can't quite get rid of, but are driving you crazy and are something of an embarrassment. There's no easy solution. Just a couple of points, though. One is, maybe it would be helpful, and maybe no one wants to hear this, but maybe it would be helpful to admit that the motivation for them and for you is pretty much the same. Okay, we're all excited about the notion that there could be someone else out there. And you know, whatever we think about them, and I pretty much know what we think about them, you know, let's give them that, at least. And maybe that is the one core thing that can be built on as we think about these modes of communication and ways of kind of telling stories. You know, for example, one of the things I've loved about being here is there's a sense of humor about the Billy Carter side of the family. And I think that's a really healthy thing to have, because as I said, they're not going to go away, and it's best to try to find a way to use that enthusiasm. I'm not talking so much about them, but the natural human impulse and the natural human question about you know, who and what is out there. The other final thing, I'll just as a note, I'll add. I've heard, I bet 5 or 6 or 7 times, I wish we had Carl Sagan back. We miss Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan, well, okay, obviously that's so true. You know, everybody here in this room was excited by him and his ability to tell stories. He's not coming back. I can say that authoritatively. While I understand, you know, bemoaning his loss, I think it's better to turn those energies to say, what am I doing that is exciting, that I think the general public could be excited about? How can I tell my story? How can our organization tell its story in a way that is exciting to the general public? Even if you don't think of yourself as storytellers, there are certain qualities, and maybe the most important qualities, that you share with Carl Sagan, which is your authenticity and your passion for the subject matter. And so I would just encourage you to build upon that, to take heart, and know that if you don't tell these stories, they will be told wrongly for you. So it's best that you get out and do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.